Picture this: ancient Egypt, the land of pharaohs, pyramids, and mighty gods. For centuries, we've been captivated by their golden treasures, intricate hieroglyphs, and the sheer scale of their monuments. We imagine a society of devout believers, tirelessly working to honor their deities, building magnificent temples, and filling them with unimaginable wealth. But what if I told you that behind the sacred incense and solemn rituals, a darker story was unfolding? What if the very people entrusted to protect these holy sites were the ones plundering them? Today, we're pulling back the veil on one of ancient Egypt's best-kept secrets: the widespread, systematic theft happening right under the noses of the gods. We'll explore how priests, the most respected members of society, became master thieves, orchestrating elaborate heists and secretly funneling divine offerings into their own pockets. This isn't a simple case of a few bad apples. It was a crisis that shook the very foundations of the Egyptian kingdom. To understand how this could even happen, we first need to grasp the sheer power and wealth of Egyptian temples. These weren't just places of worship. They were the economic hearts of the nation. Think of them as massive corporations. The great temple of Amuniasare at Karnak, for example, at its peak controlled vast estates of farmland, owned thousands of cattle, operated fleets of ships, and employed a staggering number of people. Pharaohs and wealthy nobles would donate huge amounts of gold, silver, precious stones, fine linens, and exotic goods as offerings to the gods, hoping to secure their favor in this life and the next. This constant influx of wealth made the temples unimaginably rich, with storerooms overflowing with treasure. And who held the keys to all this wealth? The priests. The high priest of a major temple was one of the most powerful figures in the land, second only to the pharaoh. They managed this immense divine economy, overseeing the rituals, the staff, and most importantly, the treasury. It was a position of immense trust, but as we know, where there is great wealth and great power, temptation is never far behind. The cracks started to show during the late New Kingdom, around the 20th dynasty. This was a period of political instability and economic decline for Egypt. The central authority of the pharaoh was weakening, and the country was facing external threats and internal strife. As the state's coffers began to run dry, it became harder to pay the workers, the soldiers, and even the artisans who maintained the royal tombs. This economic pressure created a perfect storm. The temptation to dip into the gods' vast, untouched wealth became overwhelming. And it wasn't just desperate commoners. The very priests and officials tasked with guarding these sacred treasures saw an opportunity. They had the knowledge, the access, and the authority to pull it off. They knew the temple layouts, the guard schedules, and the secret passages. They knew which storerooms held the most valuable items and how to bypass the primitive security measures of the time. This wasn't just petty theft. It was a highly organized criminal enterprise, operating from within the holiest of places. So how exactly did they do it? The methods were as ingenious as they were sacrilegious. One common technique was simply to skim off the top. When offerings were brought to the temple, a priest could easily underreport the amount. 100 sacks of grain become 90. 10 gold rings become 8. Over time, these small discrepancies added up to a fortune. Another method involved substitutions. A solid gold statue offered to a god might be secretly melted down and replaced with a gold-plated wooden replica. To the untrained eye, it looked identical, but the priests had effectively laundered the temple's assets. They also controlled the temple workshops. Craftsmen were employed to create and repair sacred objects. It was easy for a corrupt priest to order an artisan to use less gold in a new chalice or to melt down old, less significant items and divert the raw materials for personal use. They would create false records, claiming the materials were used for repairs or new divine statues, all while lining their own pockets. But the real audacity came in the form of direct looting. We have incredible evidence of this from ancient papyri, specifically the tomb robbery papyri from the reign of Ramesses IX. These documents are essentially court records detailing the interrogation and confession of thieves caught robbing royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. And what they reveal is shocking. The robbers weren't just random bandits. They often worked in gangs that included priests, temple scribes, and even local officials. In one famous confession, a man named Amenpenufer describes how his gang, which included a priest, broke into the tomb of a pharaoh. They tunneled through the rock, broke through the sealed doorways, and found the king's mummy. He describes how they stripped the gold from the mummy, stole the amulets and jewelry from the coffin, and then set the royal linens on fire to destroy the evidence. The priest in the group would have known exactly which rituals were performed to protect the tomb and, more importantly, how to bypass them, both physically and spiritually. His involvement gave the gang an insider's edge. These confessions paint a vivid picture of a society in crisis. The thieves weren't just stealing treasure. They were desecrating the bodies of their divine kings and violating the most sacred beliefs of their culture. And the fact that priests were involved shows how deep the corruption ran. Why would they do it? For some, it was simple greed. For others, it was a response to the economic hardship of the times. When you haven't been paid in months and your family is starving, the abstract concept of a god's wealth can seem less important than your immediate survival. The court records show that the stolen goods were often melted down and used as a form of currency, traded for grain, land, or other necessities. It was a black market fueled by divine gold. The government of the time tried to crack down. The trials recorded in the papyri show that they interrogated suspects, sometimes using torture, and the punishments were severe, often ending in impalement. But it was like playing a game of whack-a-mole. For every gang they caught, another seemed to spring up. The system itself was broken. The authority of the pharaoh wasn't strong enough to secure the tombs, and the moral authority of the priesthood was clearly compromised. One of the most telling examples is the story of Pasayer, the honest mayor of eastern Thebes. He was the one who first reported the tomb robberies to the higher officials. But instead of being praised, he was met with resistance and denial from his superior, a vizier who was likely complicit in the crimes. This vizier, Para, tried to cover up the scandal, conducting a sham investigation that declared the tombs were secure. It was only through Pasayer's persistence that a real investigation was launched, leading to the trials we know about today. This story shows the internal power struggles and the sheer scale of the corruption. It went all the way to the top. The thieves weren't just getting away with it. They were being protected by some of the most powerful men in Egypt. This crisis of faith and order ultimately contributed to the decline of the New Kingdom. When the people can no longer trust their leaders, both secular and religious, the social fabric begins to unravel. The gods, it seemed, were being robbed blind, and the very structure of the state was crumbling along with their plundered tombs. So what does this all mean for our understanding of ancient Egypt? It adds a fascinating and very human layer to their story. They weren't just a monolithic society of devout builders. They were complex people living in a complex world, facing economic pressures, political instability, and moral dilemmas, just like us. The story of the temple thieves reveals the tension between piety and pragmatism, between sacred duty and human greed. It shows that even in a civilization that seemed totally devoted to the divine, the temptations of earthly wealth were powerful and pervasive. The golden masks and towering statues tell one story, but the scratched confessions on a piece of papyrus tell another, more complicated tale. It's a story of crime, corruption, and a crisis of faith that rocked an ancient empire to its core. The next time you see a golden artifact from a pharaoh's tomb, remember the long and often illicit journey it might have taken, passing through the hands of not just kings and gods, but also corrupt priests and daring thieves. Thanks for joining us on this dive into the ancient underworld. If you found this story of corruption and ancient crime as fascinating as I do, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more hidden histories. Let me know in the comments what other ancient mysteries you'd like us to uncover. Until next time, keep questioning everything.